I'd like to begin by stating that it is unprecedented for the Office of the Medical Investigator to make public statements about death investigations. However, the circumstances surrounding these two deaths require accurate dissemination of important information.
And the story finally has some answers. Some, but not all. But enough to make the world now take a sigh of relief that it doesn't look like there was any direct criminal activity or intent. Betsy died of an illness related to an aggressive virus attack on her body. Gene, evidently from issues between Alzheimer's and heart-related sickness. But we still haven't been given a reasonable explanation as to how it all went down. With no cameras or witnesses, is it even possible to explain? On the Anything History channel, we will try to reasonably, rationally, and respectfully put the pieces together. Santa Fe, New Mexico, far from the flashing lights of Hollywood, nestled in quiet solitude, sat the modest home of a man who once dominated the silver screen. Gene Hackman, the legend, the enigma, had retreated from the world, living out his final years with his wife, Betsy Arakawa, in near-total seclusion. No red carpets, no interviews, just the two of them and their dogs, tucked away in quiet existence. Then silence. For days, no one saw them. No calls were made, no movement in or out of the house. Until on February 26, 2025, when someone knocked on the door and no one answered. Oh, but it wasn't family or friends like it should have been. Just maintenance guys. People paid to, at some point, be there. Yet even that was weeks later than it should have been. What authorities would find inside was a chilling scene that only raised more questions than answers. The last days of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa unfolded like a tragic slow-motion sequence, hidden from the world until the silence around them became deafening. In the isolated New Mexico home, surrounded by desert landscapes and eerie quiet, Betsy Arakawa's movements had been routine until February 11th. Surveillance cameras caught glimpses of her, out shopping, handling errands, seen with their dog, Zina. She was active, engaged in daily life, yet something was already brewing inside her. Hantavirus.
Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome is a rare disease caused by hantaviruses, but a small number of human infections are found every year in New Mexico.
The rare and deadly disease carried by rodents, mainly rats, was a silent predator. Perhaps she had unknowingly come into contact with rat droppings while handling old storage boxes, tending to the yard, or even bringing in groceries. Their grand, aging home, while pristine, was not immune to nature's intrusions. Betsy returned home on February 11th, and from that moment, the outside world lost contact with her. No more texts, no more emails, no more appearances. Something had happened behind those doors. Gene Hackman, at 95, was frail and possibly bedridden for long stretches. The images of him from 2024 suggested a man who was far weaker than the public knew. His world was limited to the walls of his home, and his reliance on Betsy was absolute. She was his connection to food, water, and even his own sense of time. But that night, something went terribly wrong. By this time, unknowingly, Betsy was being overtaken by something called the Hantavirus. She was experiencing severe fever and flu-like symptoms. Betsy, feeling unwell, may have headed to the bathroom, one of the few places she could gather herself privately and find something to take to remedy the crisis she was feeling. She had their dog Zina with her still in a travel crate. Zina had just had a medical procedure done at the vet a few days prior, and Betsy had concern for her ongoing recovery. Looking in the mirror, she must have seen a reflection of a woman whose body was betraying her. She may have not understood what she was feeling, but she felt she needed to take something for it. She was already taking prescription medications, and this would be the obvious solution. Or so she thought. It wasn't just her blood pressure or thyroid that was acting up, it was something much more serious, and she hadn't recognized it until now. Then, for some reason and somehow, she collapsed, falling to the floor. The dog, confused and trapped, remained near her, its fate sealed by the same isolation that would take Gene days later. And so the house fell silent. Gene, at this time, is battling several ailments in his body, and now being closer to an incredible 100 years old, is most likely lying in bed or reclining somewhere in the house. He is just simply waiting for her to come to him. Time passed, but Betsy did not return. She was his lifeline, the one who brought him meals, checked on him, guided him through the haze of his own declining health. Hunger gnawed at him. Thirst burned in his throat. His body, weakened by age, could not endure prolonged deprivation. At some point, maybe the second or third day, his instincts took over. He had to move. Whether he understood that Betsy was gone or simply knew that something was wrong, we will never know. But what is certain is that he struggled to rise. He grabbed his cane and signature sunglasses within reach. He made his way toward the kitchen, likely driven by the primal urge to find food to survive. Then, in the process, he fell. Betsy knew it wasn't safe for him to get up and move around on his own. But Betsy wasn't there to stop him. The stress of Gene's movement and falling triggered off a crisis for him, and he could only lay there, confused, disoriented, and because of Alzheimer's disease, he may not have even known what was even happening. And at some point, this is where it all ended for Gene. Reports say his body was discovered face down near the kitchen, a tragic confirmation that he had been conscious enough to try, but not strong enough to succeed. He must have stayed in that position, helpless, until the next day. His pacemaker sent out its final signal on February 18th, marking the moment his body gave up the fight. Gene also had heart disease, had experienced heart attacks in the past, and even had operations performed on his heart. He was already not in good physical condition. And for 7 days, he had been alone. 7 days of dehydration, starvation, confusion. 7 days without the woman who had cared for him. And all the while Zina, the small dog who had entered the house with Betsy, remained trapped in its own silent suffering, possibly starving or succumbing to the lack of care that was needed during the time. But the dogs outside were miraculously more fortunate, yet they were still deprived of food, water, and the owner's full attention. Bewildered and confused, but still alive. The real tragedy here was not just the deaths and suffering themselves, but the fact that no one had checked in sooner. How had two people, once so vibrant, been left so completely alone? This all shows that isolation has the power to kill. Not just through illness, but through neglect, through the slow erosion of connection. Had there been a single check-in, a neighbor stopping by, a phone call that was answered, perhaps this story would have ended differently. Instead, it serves as a haunting reminder of how quickly life can slip away when no one is watching. But it's not just isolated to the Hackman household. This is something that a number of people and families experience on a daily basis when people are too involved in their own world and not paying attention to those who might need a simple phone call. The Hackman home, once a refuge, became a tomb. And the questions that linger, like echoes in an empty house, may never be fully answered. But even though it may not show it in this tragic scenario, there were many people in the world who still loved Gene and what he brought to the world of cinema. Betsy and Gene were well known and recognized as a couple that contributed their lives to doing well to others. No one would have wanted things to turn out like they did. But honestly, way too many of those people who knew this couple failed to reach out and do the things that could have prevented the end that we see happening. Communication. Intentionally or not, lack of communication between all that could have been in touch brought us to this end today. So we'll now see the love and tributes play out around the world. The outpouring of condolences will come from every corner of the earth. Gene and Betsy and even their pet will receive their flowers. But flowers that seem to be coming way too late. We'll continue to cover it all, plus other intriguing stories from the annals of history. So bookmark the channel, and we will see you next time.